The Riddle of the Earth, Part 3. The Movements of a Comet. One of the great principles of the universe is the law of attraction. It operates everywhere, in thousands of subtle ways, from the greatest to the least, but the general principle is ever present. A moth is attracted to a candle, a woman attracts a man, a volcano attracts a meteor, and the sun attracts a comet. Astronomers allege that the two great outer planets, Saturn and Jupiter, attract comets into the solar system. Howe states that the attraction of Jupiter sometimes increases a comet's velocity and its orbit becomes a parabola, or, if it diminishes it, an ellipse, when the comet becomes an attaché of the sun. Many comets, he continues, mainly small, come from the direction of Jupiter, and that planet is said to have, quote, captured them. Hence, they are labelled as members of the Jupiter family. Study of the Sky, page 274. The same habit is said to apply to Saturn, believed by the ancients to be the main influence of comets, but Hale asserts that Jupiter draws in the greater number. Now, before we go any further, I'd go further than that and say that both Jupiter and Saturn are sub-brown dwarf stars, but Beaumont was writing 100 years ago, I was about to say 100 centuries ago, 100 years ago, and he didn't get everything right, so, But he is kind of right in this. But it's very interesting what he's saying about the connection between Jupiter and comets and things like that, because I've heard this before. I can discover no scientific evidence which enables astronomers to make so sweeping an assertion as does Professor Howe to the effect that Jupiter and Saturn are able to attract comets into the solar system. Well, like I said, because they're sub-brown dwarf stars, but anyway. It may be so. On the other hand, if these two planets are deemed to act as decoys, why does not the Earth attract comets to herself if they are in her vicinity? Everything suggests that comets are not attracted by our planet, or else we would experience world cataclysms as of frequent occurrence, whereas what we do see is that a comet is compelled to follow a certain course round or towards the sun, and if the Earth is unfortunate enough to get in her orbit, to get in the way, she receives what otherwise was intended for the centre of our system and the origin of our warmth and light. Why too should Jupiter, Jupiter and Saturn even, be the two planets to attract comets into our system? Uranus and Neptune are evidently greater comets and are far nearer the limits of the Sun's, quote, pull than these other two planets. Uranus has an orbit of 84.018 years and Neptune beyond with its vast year of 164.62, though Saturn with its mere 29.458 year orbit entirely into the shade as far as distance goes, and accordingly if planets act as decoys for the Sun, why not include the outer planets? The reason given is that the comets seem to come from their direction. It must, however, be... Hang on, let me get rid of this. Fucking annoying. Pop-ups are so annoying. Anyway, it must, however, be evident that if the solar attraction is so powerful as to hold the planet Neptune, although it requires 164 years to complete its orbit, it must also be the medium which draws in comets as bodies without any orbit and draws such in as they fall through space. There is a further point of some consideration in this. If a comet be an extinct planet which has lost its place in its own system and, devoid of an orbit, is flying through space at such momentous speed as makes a planet like ours appear to crawl, its headlong career would theoretically only be checked and its momentum directed towards the Sun by enormous magnetic pulling power. It is impossible to believe that such could be exerted by Saturn or Jupiter, or even that either or both of them can cause the path of a transitory comet to deviate in the slightest degree. It is only because astronomers fail to realize what a comet is that they produce such extraordinary theories as to the attraction of any planets. As the question of a comet passing a settled orbit is of major significance in identifying these bodies, I now ask whether they do or can circumscribe a definite ellipse around the Sun for any given length of time. Well, why would comets be attracted to Jupiter or Saturn? Well, because they're sub-brown dwarf stars. And the Sun is a star, it's just a different type. If everything astronomers say or do in these vital questions is suspect, it is their fault, because they regard comets as little more than a debris of sorts, intangible and gaseous, and practically harmless. Comets are not harmless, I can tell you that for sure. They assert or assume that comets possess set and definite orbits. An orbit defines a regular circuit around the Sun, yet comets still take an elongated ellipse of a highly eccentric order. They must obey, nevertheless, one law, namely that of gravity, like all heavenly bodies, and for this reason, added to the vast magnetic attraction of the Sun, fuck off, they are pulled in and ultimately consumed. But astronomers calculate normal orbits from the direction of their apparent motion. Halley produced this theory in relation to the comet called after him, and to which he gave an orbit of 76 years, and up to the present time no one has exposed the absurdity of this theory, but on the contrary others of the faith, interesting he puts it that way, have traced it back over the centuries to William the Conqueror and even earlier. Against such an accepted view of consistency, many famous comets do not return at all, like that of Biela's comet. Others identified as so-and-so arrive either early or late, while others again whose orbits are estimated at some tremendous period of time. Even 100,000 years have been calculated for some comets return at an inconveniently short period. If no orbit is possible, these comets cannot be identified by them, and the naming of them, such as Halley's or Encke's, is sheer and misleading nonsense. No orbit is possible because no cometary body possesses consistency. A comet entering the solar system pursues at once a path direct to the Sun and is subjected to a powerful tidal strain and a tremendous magnetic energy upon a body undergoing disruption every moment. This operates in the redistribution of the former planet and its component parts, whereby all particles are automatically sifted out and their order according to weight. Howe says that a comet varies from substantial masses in the nucleus to particles like sand. The spectrum of the 1882 comet betrayed hydrocarbon, sodium, iron vapor, while calcium and magnesia were suspected. Such materia indicate very much, for sodium forms the metallic base of soda, calcium of lime, and manganese is a hard, brittle metal. Thus it must be inferred that the 1882 comet possessed, among other materia, soda, lime, iron, and probably both chalk and sand. So if a cometary body in its rapid passage through the heavens sorts itself out according to weight, and even according to the various substances, we must regard the movement as elongated or serpentine, the nucleus consisting of the mass, probably meteoric iron, then heavier rocks like granite or perhaps flint, followed by basalt in liquefied form, for the most part down to the smaller masses, such as clay, lime, chalk, sand, and thence the diaphanous tail of gases. The whole careers along to its appointed end unless it comes into contact with a planet, and if a broadside collision occurs, the effect may be imagined. If only a portion of the tail is drawn in, or if particles falling away as meteors or meteorites strike our world or any other, the results are as have been described. Such an arrangement explains why masses of insects, if surviving the transport, appear to be tabulated and sorted out. A celestial body that is constantly wasting its own substance cannot possibly possess an orbit of any stability. Howe says that a periodic comet, that is a comet deemed to return at a definite period, moving in an ellipse, quote, loses substance as each perihelion passage and must, quote, be wasted away in time. Obviously this is the case, but for some reason best known to themselves, the astronomers ignored the vital fact when calculating the alleged visits of comets judged on their apparent path at the time of observation. A comet cannot possibly continue in any sustained orbit for any length of time, for there cannot be any geometrical figure, ellipse, parabola, or hyperbola to describe a moving body whose weight and accordingly gravity is continually shifting.